Welcome back, everyone. Glad to have you with us as we continue to journey through my life today with Ellen G. White.
Yeah,
Last time we were looking at the beauty of Sabbath rest.
absolutely.
Today we were jumping into the entry for January 6th,
Okay.
which is have faith in God and really unpacking what it means to trust in God's plan, even when, things are a little uncertain.
It's such a timely message, I think we all kind of crave that security and assurance that comes with knowing that you're not alone when navigating the uncertainties of life.
Absolutely. And she starts the entry with a verse from Isaiah chapter 26, verse 4. Trust ye in the Lord forever, for in the Lord Jehovah is everlasting strength.
It's such powerful imagery there.
Mm-hmm.
This sense of unwavering support, that reminder that even when our strength fails, God's strength is a constant.
You know what strikes me about that verse is the emphasis on everlasting. It's not just for today. It's about a deep and enduring trust that carries us through every season of life.
It makes me think about how we as Sabbath keepers practice that trust every week.
We choose to rest, to step back from our work, knowing that God will provide and sustain us.
That's such a good point. Sabbath observance is an act of radical trust in so many ways.
Yeah.
We're surrendering our need to be in control. You're acknowledging that God's timing is perfect, and we can just rest in the confidence that He will take care of us.
And speaking of God's power, Ellen G. White goes on to caution us against limiting the Holy One of Israel.
Yeah.
She says, His is the greatness, the power, the glory, the victory, the majesty. Let us not limit the Holy One of Israel. It's like she's reminding us that we can't even begin to fathom with our human minds, the vastness of his capabilities.
It's a very humbling thought. We often try to fit God into our limited understanding,
Yeah.
almost like we're trying to put him in a box.
Right.
But the reality is his power and wisdom are far beyond anything we can even comprehend.
It's like trying to measure the ocean with a teaspoon. This idea of God's limitless power really challenges me because there are times when I feel like my prayers aren't being answered or like God is distant or silent. So how do we reconcile this idea of a God who is all-powerful with the very real struggles that we face in our lives?
That's a question so many of us grapple with, I think, and it's a tension that we'll probably never fully resolve on this side of heaven.
Yeah.
But one thing that I think is important to remember is that God's power doesn't always show up in the ways that we expect or desire. Sometimes his greatest acts of power are actually the ones that we can't see. The subtle workings that are happening behind the scenes that ultimately lead to our good and his glory.
So it's about trusting that he's working even when we don't have the evidence to see it.
Exactly. And I think that's where faith comes in. It's about choosing to believe even when our circumstances, our feelings tell us otherwise. It's about holding on to the promises of God's word, even when we don't understand how those promises will be fulfilled.
It's like that verse in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1. Now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. It's about trusting in the unseen, in that reality of God's presence and power, even when we can't fully grasp it.
Beautifully put. And this actually brings us to another powerful point that Ellen G. White makes in the devotional that really highlights that tension between our human limitations and God's infinite knowledge. She writes, "We can see only a little way before us, but all things are naked and opened unto the eyes of him with whom we have to do."
It's that contrast that I think is so striking.
Right.
It's a reminder that we're often stumbling around in the dark while God has, the entire picture.
Yeah.
The beginning, the end, and everything in between.
Which makes you wonder.
How can we possibly trust in his plan
Right.
when we can't even see what's right in front of us?
And that's such a valid question, and I think it gets to the heart of what it means to have faith. It's about choosing to surrender our limited perspective and trust in God's perfect vision, even when we don't understand it.
It's almost like we have to choose, Do we cling to our limited understanding, or do we let go and trust in God's infinite wisdom?
Right.
And honestly, letting go can be terrifying.
I understand that feeling. It goes against our human nature to relinquish control, to embrace uncertainty. But I think that's where the beauty of the Sabbath comes in. It's a weekly reminder that we don't have to have it all figured out.
It's like a practice run for trusting God with our lives.
Yes.
We intentionally set aside our work, our worries, our attempts to control everything, and we just rest in that confidence that he's got this.
Yes. And in that act of surrender, in that willingness to let go, we open ourselves up to experience a deeper level of trust, not just in the context of the Sabbath, but in every single area of our lives.
So it's about taking that Sabbath mindset, the attitude of trust and surrender, and applying it to the uncertainties and the challenges that we face throughout the week.
Precisely. And I think as we continue to explore the rest of this devotional entry, we're going to discover even more practical ways to cultivate that trust and apply it to our daily lives. As we think about surrendering our need for control and embracing that trust in God's plan, I find myself drawn to the imagery that Ellen G. White uses in this next part of the devotional. She writes, "Whatever burdens lay heavily, cast them on the Lord." It's such a vivid picture. The idea of literally taking those heavy burdens, those worries and anxieties that just weigh us down, and handing them over to God.
It's a beautiful image, and it makes me think of the physical act of laying down a heavy load.
Right.
There's a sense of relief, of freedom that comes with releasing that weight.
Exactly. And that's exactly the kind of relief and freedom God offers us when we choose to cast our burdens on him. He doesn't want us to carry those things alone.
Okay.
He invites us to share them with him, to find rest and strength in his presence.
It's like he's saying, come to me all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest.
Yeah.
As we read in Matthew chapter 11, verse 28.
And that rest isn't just a temporary break. It's a deep, abiding peace that comes from knowing that we're not alone in our struggles. It's the peace that surpasses all understanding, as Paul describes it in Philippians chapter 4, verse 7.
So how do we actually do that? How do we practically cast our burdens on the Lord? Is it just a matter of praying about it and then trying to forget about it?
I think it's more than just mentioning it in prayer and moving on.
Okay.
It's about making a conscious decision to surrender those burdens to God's care, to trust that he is working in and through those situations even when we don't see the evidence.
So it's about acknowledging our limitations, our inability to control everything.
Right.
And recognizing that God is, his power and his wisdom are far greater than our own.
Exactly. It's about shifting our perspective from, I have to fix this, to, God, I trust you with this. It's about releasing our grip on those burdens and allowing God to work in his own time and in his own way.
Which could be so difficult, especially when we're facing challenges that feel overwhelming or insurmountable.
Absolutely.
It's so easy to get caught up in our own fears and anxieties and forget that God is still in control.
That's where I think that reminder from Psalm chapter 121, verse 4 comes in. Behold, he that keepeth Israel shall neither slumber nor sleep.
It's such a powerful assurance that God is always watching over us, always working on our behalf, even when we're feeling overwhelmed or discouraged.
It's like a comforting lullaby reminding us that we can rest secure in God's care. And it makes me think about the Sabbath again. It's a day where we intentionally choose to rest, to let go of our worries and anxieties, and trust that God is sustaining us even while we're sleeping.
That's such a beautiful connection. Sabbath rest is such a tangible expression of our trust in God's provision and care. It's a reminder that we don't have to strive and struggle to earn his love or his favor. We can simply rest in the assurance that he is always with us, always working for our good.
So we've talked about trusting in God's strength, acknowledging his limitless power, and casting our burdens on him. But there's one more crucial element I think that Ellen G. White highlights in this devotional.
Okay.
And that's the importance of believing in God's promises.
Yes. She says, you must learn the simple art of taking God at his word. Then you have solid ground beneath your feet.
It's such a simple statement, yet it carries such profound implications.
I think what strikes me about that statement is the idea of solid ground.
Yeah.
In a world that often feels so uncertain, so unpredictable,
Right.
God's promises are like an anchor,
Yes.
a foundation that we can actually build our lives upon.
It's like we're standing on bedrock, unshakable and secure no matter what storms may be raging around us.
But honestly, there are times when I struggle to fully grasp the reality of God's promises. It's one thing to read them in the Bible, but it's another thing entirely to truly believe them and to live as though they're true.
I think that's a common struggle. We live in a world that constantly tells us to rely on our own strength, our own intelligence, our own resources.
Right.
It can be so difficult to shift our mindset to a place of complete dependence on God and on his promises.
So how do we bridge that gap? How do we move from simply acknowledging God's promises to actually living them out?
Well, I think it starts with a willingness to just be honest with God about our doubts and our struggles. We can bring those questions and those fears to him in prayer, asking him to help us see his faithfulness and to strengthen our belief in his promises.
It's like we're saying, God, I want to believe, but I need your help.
Exactly. And He honors that kind of honesty and vulnerability. He doesn't expect us to have it all figured out. He just invites us to come to him as we are with all of our doubts and uncertainties and to allow him to work in our hearts and in our
And
minds.
that's where the beauty of the Sabbath comes in again, doesn't it?
Yeah,
It's a day where we intentionally set aside our own striving and we choose to rest in God's presence, allowing his truth to kind of wash over us and renew our faith.
beautifully said. Sabbath observance is a tangible way to practice taking God at his word.
Mm.
We're choosing to believe that he will provide for us, that he will guide us, that he will fulfill his promises in our lives.
It's a weekly reminder that we can let go of our anxieties and just trust in God's faithfulness. As we continue to kind of explore, these practical implications of this trust in our everyday lives, I think we'll discover that the Sabbath is so much more than just a day of rest.
Yeah.
It's a day of transformation, a day of renewed faith, and a day of deepening our relationship with the one who holds our future. So we've talked about trusting in God's strength, acknowledging his limitless power, casting our burdens on him, and believing in his promises.
That's a lot to unpack. And I think I'm just wondering how this translates into everyday life. Where do we even begin to apply these concepts when we step out of the studio and into the real world?
It's a great question, and it's something I think we all grapple with. It's one thing to talk about these concepts in theory,
Right.
but to put them into practice when you're in the middle of your busy life with all the demands and the uncertainties can be a little daunting.
Absolutely. So where do we start? What are some steps we can take to move from just knowing these things to actually living them out? Well, I think it starts with awareness. We need to become more aware of the moments when we're tempted to just rely on our own strength, our own understanding, our own attempts to just control a situation.
So like when we're stressing over deadlines or worrying about the future or trying to manipulate circumstances to get the results we want.
Exactly. Those are the moments when we need to pause, take a breath, and consciously choose to surrender those anxieties to God.
Okay.
It might be a silent prayer that you whisper in the middle of a crazy day, or a moment of quiet reflection during your morning commute.
So it's like those mini Sabbath moments that we can build into our day,
Yes.
those intentional pauses where we can reconnect with God and remind ourselves that he's in control.
Exactly. And I think those small acts of surrender, those little whispers of trust throughout the day, can gradually transform our hearts and our minds and make us more receptive to God's guidance, more reliant on his strength.
It's like building a muscle, the
Yeah.
muscle of trust through those repeated acts of surrender.
Yes. I love that.
Those moments where we choose faith over fear.
And like any muscle, the more we use it, the stronger it gets.
Mm-hmm.
And as our trust in God grows stronger, we'll find that we're less likely to be swayed by those uncertainties and anxieties of life. We'll have a deeper sense of peace, a confidence that no matter what challenges come our way, God is with us. He's guiding us, and he's working everything out for good.
It's a beautiful picture.
Yeah.
But, I think for many of us, including myself, it's an ongoing journey. There are days when I feel like I'm winning.
Right.
And there are days when I'm just like clinging to control for dear life.
How do we navigate those moments when our trust falters? Those inevitable setbacks.
I think the key is grace. We need to extend grace to ourselves, recognizing that we're human. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to stumble along the way. The important thing is that we keep getting back up. We keep choosing to trust. We keep surrendering those anxieties to God.
It's about progress, not perfection.
Exactly.
And it's about remembering that God's love for us is unconditional. He doesn't expect us to have it all figured out. He just invites us to come as we are, right, with all of our, imperfections and doubts, and allow him to work in our hearts and minds.
Beautifully said. And as we continue to explore God's love and his grace, I think we'll discover that journey of trust is less about striving and more about surrendering. It's about letting go of our need to control and allowing ourselves to be held by the one who knows us better than we know ourselves.
And as we wrap up our reflection on this devotional entry, I'm just reminded of the incredible peace that comes from knowing that we're not alone in this journey. God is with us every step of the way, offering his strength, his guidance, and his unwavering love.
And that is a truth worth holding on to. A truth that can sustain us through any storm, any uncertainty, any challenge that life may throw our way.
So as we move forward from this conversation, let's remember that simple yet profound message. Trust in God, trust in his strength, trust in his plan, trust in his promises, and let that trust be the foundation on which we build our lives.
And if you've been inspired by this conversation, be sure to hit subscribe and turn on those notifications so you don't miss out on future episodes. And let's close in prayer. Dear God, thank you for your word, for the gift of your presence, and for the assurance that you are always with us. Help us to grow in our trust in you, to rely on your strength, and to live each day in the fullness of your love and grace. In Jesus' name, amen.